of curriculum materials that define themselves as balanced literacy. You can trace the roots of this MSV idea back to the work of a woman named Marie Clay. She was a developmental psychologist in New Zealand who came up with some ideas about reading that were similar to some of the things that Ken Goodman came up with at about the same time. They didn't develop these ideas together. Their ideas were not completely simpatico, but they did meet and travel in similar literacy circles in the 1980s and 90s. Clay built her ideas into a reading intervention program for struggling first graders called Reading Recovery. Reading Recovery was implemented across New Zealand in the 1980s, and it went on to become one of the most widely used reading intervention programs in the entire world. Clay's theories were popularized as part of core reading instruction here in the United States by Irene Fountas and Gay-Sue Pinnell. They are education professors who learned from Clay in the 1980s. Fountas and Pinnell are now well known for an approach to reading instruction known as guided reading, and for a widely used reading assessment system that uses what are known as leveled books, the benchmark assessment system. Fountas and Pinnell also sell a reading intervention program called Leveled Literacy Intervention, or LLI. In an Education Week survey, 43% of elementary school teachers reported using LLI. That's a really high number. You will find lots of examples of that meaning, structure, visual idea in Fountas and Pinnell books, products, and materials. You'll also find MSV and cueing in the Units of Study series written by Lucy Calkins. She's a professor at Teachers College Columbia. Units of Study is more commonly referred to as Reader's Workshop. According to the Ed Week survey that I just mentioned, 16% of teachers reported using Units of Study to teach reading. That makes it the third most widely used set of materials for teaching reading in the United States. You will find some phonics in the Calkins and Fountas and Pinnell approaches. In fact, Lucy Calkins recently created a Units of Study for Teaching Phonics program. Fountas and Pinnell have books and materials to teach phonics too. They've had them for a long time. But phonics is often presented as one way to know what a word is. It's one strategy. It's that third cue in the cueing system. What schools need to know is that when they buy materials from Calkins and Fountas and Pinnell, they're buying an approach to teaching reading that's rooted in a particular theory about how reading works. And it's this idea that skilled readers use meaning and context to identify words as they read. So what you are likely to find in a lot of American classrooms today is 20 to 30 minutes of a phonics program, and then Reader's Workshop and guided reading, where kids are taught that when they come to a word they don't know, they can sound it out and use what they learned in their phonics lessons, but they can also use other strategies. They can think about a word that makes sense. They can look at the first letter of the word, or they can just take a page from Skippy the Frog and skip the word altogether. So what's wrong with this? Why not teach kids lots of strategies to help them when they come to a word they don't know? It seems like a good idea. The reason you don't want to do it comes back to the scientific research on reading. So here's little boys, what's going on in their brains as they're learning to read? And here's the thing, no one knew for a really long time. But as I've said, over the past half century or so, scientists in labs and classrooms all over the world have done this huge amount of studies about how skilled reading works. And a key thing that they figured out is that skilled readers do not use cues and context to read words. In fact, what scientists have discovered, is that what scientists have discovered is that this is how poor readers read. Poor readers tend to have a hard time with word identification. Too many of the words they come across are little mysteries, series of letters they don't know and can't quite figure out. So they use a bunch of other strategies to try to understand what the words say. They memorize as many words as they can. When they come across a word they don't know, they look at the first few letters and try to think of a word that makes sense. In other words, they use context to try to come up with a word that fits. And when they can't figure out what a word is using context clues, they just skip the word altogether. Often, they can get the gist of what they're reading this way. But using context, guessing and skipping words, this is not what it's like when you're a skilled reader. Okay, sorry, I'm getting a message. I got that. What cognitive scientists have figured out is that a key difference between skilled readers and unskilled readers is that skilled readers can immediately and accurately recognize words. They don't need to guess or predict or use context. Skilled readers know tens of thousands of words instantly on sight. In fact, if you're a skilled reader, your brain has gotten so good at reading words that you process the word book faster than you process a picture of a book. So how did your brain, which is not meant to read, how did it get so good at that? It happens through this process called orthographic mapping. You have to understand some basics about orthographic mapping to understand why phonics is so important and to understand why teaching cueing, is not a good idea. So here's a quick and very simplified explanation of orthographic mapping. It's the process we use to store printed words in our long-term memory. It's not the same thing as memorizing words. So the way you store a printed word in your long-term memory, and you do this unconsciously, this is something that happens in the background, you attend closely to how a written word is spelled, and then you link the sequence of letters to the word's pronunciation and the meaning. So for example, very basic example, a child knows the meaning and pronunciation of the word cat, and the word gets orthographically mapped to her memory when she links the sounds in the word cat to the written word cat. So as you can see, that requires an awareness of the speech sounds and words, phonemic awareness. It also requires an understanding of how those sounds are represented by letters. That's phonics. So you need phonemic awareness and phonics to orthographically map words into your long-term memory. Once a word has been orthographically mapped to your memory, you know it instantly on sight. In fact, you cannot suppress your ability to read that word. You don't have to sound it out, but you know it instantly because at some